think you go.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to The Bleed. This is our first official show. We've had 2 practice runs before, but now we're live. So we've got a bunch of guests today. There's myself, David Dissanayake. I'm a writer for Bleeding Cool. We've got Joe Schmidt, who is in Arizona. He's also a writer for Bleeding Cool. Eric Groves up in Portland. He is another writer from Bleeding Cool. And we have Ryan Burton, the writer for the new image book, Dark Engine. It's great. If you haven't read it, definitely go pick it up. And one of my friends, Katie Graves, who comes into my shop in San Francisco. And she's a lab technician and general badass, and as much of a fanatic of comics as any of us here, so we decided to invite her in to come hang out with us today. The book that we're talking about this time around is Seconds by Bryan Lee O'Malley, his original graphic novel and follow-up to the Scott Pilgrim series we all know and love. I think we all have some different opinions, but we'll get to that soon. I guess we're going to start, we'll all go around talking about like either a comic that we've read or like a piece of news or something that's been exciting us. I guess, Katie, why don't we start with you? What have you read this week that's got you really excited?
Well, I haven't got my books this week, but I'm catching up on the last couple weeks, and I guess Spread is the only book I really have not a lot to say about, just something, but it's been kind of interesting because and I was initially attracted by the art, and the narration kind of is very reminiscent of Hazel and Saga, so I was kind of not sure how I felt about it, but then the writer addressed it at the end, so I'm not sure how I feel about it still, but at the very least it's beautiful, entertaining, so that's kind of what I'm stoked on right now.
Ryan, how about you?
Well, like Katie, I haven't picked up my books this week. That's because the books that I was looking forward to, they got pushed till September. I always pick up East of West, and I always pick up Prophet, right? Those are the 2 books. Yeah, those are the 2 books I have to go to the store for. And usually I'll spend much more money getting other books. So I haven't really read anything this week, but I came across some very old news that the little children's book, The Little Prince, was actually adapted in 2010 by a French artist. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name because I'll butcher it. But it's beautiful, and I think I'll be getting that off of Amazon this week. It's incredibly gorgeous, and I recommend everybody hopping online after this and typing in The Little Prince graphic novel. Looks great.
Cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Eric?
I caught up on the first couple issues of the new Storm solo series by Greg Pak and Victor Ibanez. We're gonna just have we need a bell in case we're gonna definitely mispronounce somebody's name.
Yeah, like a curse jar or something. Yeah, we need
anyway, I caught up on the first couple issues today. I think it's really good. Actually, I really like the direction that he's taking it. It's very, so far it's single issue stories. It seems to be very grounded, which is just sort of surprising. You think Storm, you don't necessarily think grounded, but it's incredibly grounded, kind of dealing with normal people stuff. Conflict in Africa and homeless kids in New York. So I think it's a real pleasant surprise. Not that it's good, but that it's written and kind of created the way that it is.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how about you, Joe?
I'm a big Hickman fan, and I've been reading his Marvel stuff and New Avengers this week. I always read that when it comes out, and New Avengers was really good. It felt like a culmination to a lot of stuff that he'd been building for a long time, especially in the new series, and it really gives away to. I believe he's wrapping it up and doing more creator-owned stuff, which awesome. But I really like this run and to see where it's going. It was a good read.
Mm-hmm. Cool. As for me, I didn't really get to too much. It was a busy week for me. I did pick up the new Oni Press release of James Stokoe's Wonton Soup.
Cool.
Yeah, actually, I have it right here. And I've actually been meaning to read this for a long, long time. I love
cool.
Stokoe, man. His art's just insane.
Yeah, you could kill somebody with that book, man.
And I just picked up, I think it was last week or the week before, Marvel did the best, or made the best decision they ever did, and let him do an issue of the Avengers, which was just so friggin' awesome.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah.
Rogue and Doctor Strange and Beta Ray Bill messing up Moloids.
It was great.
Beautiful.
Just like Iron Man as a brain in a vat, just bitching about how badly he needs a drink.
He was giving frontal lobes for a drink or something like that.
Yeah.
It was great.
And that last splash page with Captain America floating in the negative zone was just it was so awesome. Just a tease of what could be, you know. It was so cool.
Yeah, it was a great idea too that what was it, that the United States, the entirety of it gets sucked into the negative zone, and Captain America goes in searching for the lost United States. That's great.
It's so
of course he will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've been excited. I'm gonna sit down and start reading it. We're actually at the comic shop that I work at here in San Francisco. We do like a bi-weekly like sort of book club kind of thing, very similar to this, a little more laid back, I guess. And so this is Wonton Soup is what we're going to be reading for it, and it was just the perfect excuse to finally buy it. So yeah, now that we've taken care of that, let's delve into seconds. So obviously written and drawn mostly by Bryan Lee O'Malley, and he had what's his name? Jason Fisher, I think, was his assistant on the book. Colors by Nathan Fairbairn.
Is it Fairbairn or Fairbairn? That's
Fairbairn.
Or
Again, there's a little bell going off in my
one of you was putting something in the jar.
Mispronounced Fairbairn, however you pronounce it. He's also doing the covers not the covers, the colors for the Scott Pilgrim reprints that they're doing.
Okay.
And he's great. Actually, I heard a funny story. I think it was about Nathan Fairbairn, that they were doing color tryouts, to see who they were going to hire to do the colors for the Scott Pilgrim stuff. And Fairbairn had done some Scott Pilgrim porn comics online. What's
the website for this?
Yeah, we're gonna need the URL.
Yeah, look it up. I may be mistaken. It might have been Fish or Fisher. It was one of the two of them. But that it ended up essentially helping them get the job because they saw it and they're like, this is actually really damn good. Let's get this guy. So, the moral: if you want to get into comics, write porn rip-offs of other people's creators or creations, you'll get righted.
I'm on it.
So I guess I picked this book because it was something that I've been really excited about. I was really looking forward to its release all the way up to the day of. I've read it about 2.5 times at this point. I think I was so impressed with it the first time around. When I got it the day of, I just started rereading it again, and it's just, I find it to be a really impressive work and sort of shows a creator bringing himself up to sort of like the next level. I think Scott Pilgrim was great and really well done, but this sort of, to me, in my mind at least, shows him sort of bringing it up to the next step and sort of upping his skill, both with his art style and with his storytelling ability. So I wanted to bring it to the group and see what we all thought about it. I guess to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you guys thought about the art itself before we actually get into the story. Because he is, a cartoonist. It's cool to actually, for this one, it's cool to have a guy who both writes and draws his own stuff. And I guess let's start with Ryan. What did you think about the art on the book?
I really enjoyed the art. The reason I liked it is because it was so simple, but it conveyed so much. You can tell O'Malley is confident with his abilities, and you can tell that there's been a lot of care, a lot of patience put into each page. And I appreciate that fact, and I appreciate just the overall sense of pace that his artwork holds alone. And it's pretty incredible. The main character, Katie, she has Sonic the Hedgehog hair.
Yeah.
But she's so relatable, and I think that speaks to his craft, that he can take such a cartoonish figure, if you will, and make them so relatable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I kind of think that's one of the strengths of sort of like that manga influence there, when you have things like the big eyes and like the big hair and just like very simple sort of drawings. Even though it's so simple, especially with like facial expressions, like it almost makes it easier to convey like a large amount of sort of emotional impact in such a small little thing with just like just little things with the eyebrows or just the size.
Yeah, I totally agree. It strips down all the superfluous crap, and it just shows you the bare emotion.
Yeah, it made me think of Scott. I don't know. Scott McCloud, the guy who did Understanding Comics. I don't know if you guys have ever read that.
I haven't read it, but it's I think it's pretty well known. In
it he talks about
pretty much.
Well, actually, if we I won't go into it. Never mind. But one of the things that struck me too with his art style was sort of like the sense of like dynamicism and fluidity to it. It seemed almost in like constant movement, and that not only was it just sort of very easy to read, and like the pace at which you can read it is very, very quick, but it seems like there's always something, like the characters are always moving, that the story itself is always moving. Well, like a lot of times in American comics, you'll find that it's like a combination of static images, which are very effective for certain things, for sure. But it's like with manga, a lot of times you get that sense of, like I said before, fluidity that like oftentimes isn't there, and it's like in different ways. For example, like when Bryan Lee O'Malley like writes some of like the sound effects in, like I don't know if you remember in the first couple pages when it's just Lise and her like staring at each other, and he writes that like stare in really big letters in between the two. Even though it is the static image, two characters just sitting there looking at each other, not moving, but like putting that little word in. I guess it wasn't really little; it was a pretty big word. It almost makes that image move, you know. And yeah, I was curious what you thought about that. If any of you guys had any thoughts on things like that.
Well, the lettering was, I'm surprised that he had someone else doing the lettering, because it's so seamless a part of the artwork. It's like Bryan Lee O'Malley himself was adding it in there, and I think that really adds to it, and it adds to the ease of the read, that you were talking about. But and like you were saying, it's so thought out and well done and confident that he you can see the shift throughout the story in everything becoming darker and everything becoming bigger but not bigger. The sense of perspective of that whole building of seconds changes when she brings the cauldron in, and it kind of, it gradually just, the artwork and the tone gets as dark as the story it does, and it was so easy to digest, but it's so nuanced, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to what Ryan was saying. Just you can tell that like O'Malley is just really confident, and exactly. His skill is just on full display here, and it was especially towards the end of Scott Pilgrim, I think too. But like this just sort of shows off all the things that kind of he learned over the years, and sort of brought it on full display for this book, especially with the art.
You had a nice point earlier, David, where you said he just kind of took that next step. Mm-hmm. He just, I don't want to say evolved, but he certainly grew as a creator. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I really. It was interesting that he brought on Jason Fisher as an art assistant because his style is like very different. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of his like solo work. But I think he does a bunch of webcomics. I don't really, or I hadn't really followed him before this book. But and you can see in the pages, like if you look at the characters versus the backgrounds, like the character designs are so simple. There's just very few lines to them. Very basic colors, like nothing's really too complicated. But then when you look at the backgrounds, for example, like in some of the scenes where it shows you at the beginning, like the restaurant itself, and it like shows you from like the windows and like the rafter boards and everything to like the bar and the food that's on the plate. Everything is like really, really detailed, and it has like a very distinctive feel, as opposed to the characters and like a detailed way as opposed to like the simplicity, and it sort of like creates this kind of new aesthetic that neither of them have separately, and sort of adds up to what Seconds was. And I think it was genius, not only for just so you can hit the deadlines, because I can't even imagine trying to write a 350-page graphic novel by yourself on deadline. That just blows my mind. But it's cool when you get two artists working together on like the same page, like comics are always awesome, especially like when you have a writer and an artist, a colorist, and everyone sort of collaborative. But when you actually have two artists on that same page, it like sort of brings a new dynamic, a new set of sort of like almost like 3D element to it, and I like when you can sort of see that this one person did it and did this little particular aspect, and this other person did this other particular aspect. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the elements of the collaboration. I mean, to go to Joe's point, they work so well together that you sort of have to be. I mean, on the first read, it's easy to just see this as a singular creation of everything sort of working perfectly together. Maybe it is almost difficult to imagine that O'Malley had any help, but he did, and you can see the work, you can see all the labor that's been put into it, but it's all so well meshed together that it can fool you. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I mean the two things that O'Malley does really well here, in the whole team and in the art and in the story, is that he knows when to restrain himself. He knows when not to put more detail into something. Again, what he leaves off of the page is just as important as what he puts onto the page. And he does it in such a way, the whole team does it in such a way that it effectively makes it seem easy. So, I mean, I think artistically, if you can get to the point where your omission becomes part of the composition, right? It should always, but your omission becomes almost a star of the show. The simplicity of it becomes the star of the show, and nobody really even pays attention. They're just carried along seamlessly through the whole thing, enjoying every page. I think that's a remarkable accomplishment for the whole team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. When someone just reads through the entire book, like Joe, you were saying earlier that you just read through it all in a night, like being able to construct a book that's like so easily read and you can do it so quickly, is like a really difficult thing to do. And it's just like, as you said, it's a startling accomplishment for them.
I read the whole thing in a single sitting when I first opened it up. There are only a few books that I can think of that are as long as Seconds that I had that same experience with. And the only one that really comes to mind at the moment is Blankets by Thompson. I mean, I think that was the same deal. Like, open it up, started reading it, just sort of fell into the book from page one. I had that same experience here.
Mm-hmm. So I guess let's go around. Like, all in all, like, did you like this book, and why? Katie, let's start with you because you've been quiet a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I really liked it. I like Bryan Lee O'Malley's work. It's fun. It's always a quick read. He's got a very unique art style, and fluidity of movement, just like you guys were talking about, and I definitely enjoyed it. I think someone had brought up in an earlier discussion that there weren't really any consequences, and I felt like the moral of the story was that you can't really change how things are, but at the same time, everything that all the consequences that should have been there, like, they didn't really pan out, I guess, because everything was okay in the end. But it was really fun, and I just love his style. So I mean, I could probably read anything of his and be stoked on it.
Yeah, Joe, why don't you follow up with that? I know you were talking about that a little bit.
Well,
you didn't like the book, right?
No, I did. One of our complaints was last week we talked about sex criminals when we were discussing afterwards, was that we were all just so happy that we read this book, and there were very few criticisms, and I really liked this book. I got through it very quickly, and I hate to be critical about things from very talented people, but my only beef with the book was that it played with a lot of very high stakes. She was constantly changing everything and getting further and further and further away and ruining things, and by trying to make them better and then being selfish about it. And I really like the character. I really, really like the character and her narration, her mind, working against her, what her actions and what she's actually saying. Even though it's the narrator, it gives her a dimension that she recognizes that she's flawed, but she doesn't act like it. And at the end of the story, when she goes through all of this, there's really no consequences for it. In the end, she gets everything that she wanted, and it doesn't really show her working harder for it. It just shows her going through all these troubles, and then realizing her mistake, going back and trying to fix it, and the story jumps and everything's perfect except for her friend has burnt arms, and it just seems like that's the only consequence to me. And I don't know, that just didn't really sit well with me, that after going through all that and and making those mistakes like she did, that she didn't really suffer for it. I mean, she did in the moment, but there were no lasting consequences.
Yeah, I think there was even like one point where she was just like, "Oh yeah, I can fix this later." I mean, it didn't seem like she really grasped the gravity of everything, but she was kind of like blasé about it, and I'm not sure she learned a whole bunch towards the end, but I don't know. I mean, it was definitely, yeah.
Well, Ryan, what do you think about that?
I was having a similar discussion with someone else in the industry about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He just bought the book, and I ruined the ending for him, thinking that he had already bought them. And I asked him, and I said, "Do you think House Fairy, Liz, or Liz, however you pronounce her name, what do you think? Do you think it would have been a more powerful ending if the book would have stopped with her taking a bite of the mushroom and then it cutting to the clouds?" Right, at the end of the story, everything is wrapped up really nicely for Katie, the main character. She gets the boyfriend. She learns some valuable lessons. But as soon as I finished it, and I immensely enjoyed it, the first thought I had was, how would this have been received if the book stopped right after the fairy ate the mushroom and it cut to clouds? I think it's on my page. Let me see here. So yeah, what if it cut off at page 307?
I think that would have been a great ending. I would have probably enjoyed it a lot more. But I mean,
but I sort of lean towards, like, let's keep everybody guessing. It's not necessarily the Inception ending all the time, you know, where that cradle ever happened. But it's you know, let's see what readers insinuate from us cutting this short. But it was a remarkable book. I especially enjoyed the visuals. I enjoyed reflecting upon it. It's really hard to review something that had so much love and care put into it. It's very difficult to review. It's a beautiful package. The dust cover all the way to Dustin Harbin's lettering is gorgeous. This creative team is working in sync, basically. And I think it was to Eric or Joe's point that you could tell what a remarkable product this was, a remarkable book this was, because how easy it was to read and how easy it was to dive into it. As I mentioned, though, as soon as I finished it, the first thing I thought is, how would people receive this if it ended right then and there? Now, the creator I was speaking to actually enjoyed the ending, which I did too, but he said, I don't know, I like it when everything kind of wraps up in a nice bow. So what do you all think?
I like the way it ended for this project. I wouldn't say that I like every story to wrap up with a nice bow, but this particular story seemed to me like a children's story for adults. It seemed like a fairy tale for 29-year-olds. Fairy tales tend to have complete endings, and I thought that there was something satisfying about it. I mean, the what I kept thinking about was Miyazaki movies. This just reminded me of a Miyazaki movie, and while those movies tend to have sadness, they do tend to resolve at the end. They don't have ambiguity. So I don't know. I think for this particular project, there is something that sort of feels like it's connecting appropriately with the genre that it's attempting to be. I also thought the Scott Pilgrim ending was what you're talking about. Like the old, the Scott Pilgrim ending was uncertain. It was all unsettled. It was all just sort of, well, maybe they'll be happy ever after. They probably won't. And this, so in some ways, I suppose I'm reading this a little bit in context with that ending. And I like the ending of the Scott Pilgrim series, and I think that it suited that series well. But it is interesting that they go a completely different way with it. Like that one went with a bit of there are some consequences, there's some bad stuff that happened, and ambiguity. This one ends with, I think there are consequences. I think the consequences, though, end up being positive consequences. Positive consequences are she's actually made a friend. She's actually engaged in an adult relationship with her ex-boyfriend. I think it's not bad to have a story for adults that ends on an upbeat note. And I actually kind of like okay, this is it. Like there aren't that many examples where I feel like the book is not pandering to me and also doesn't feel the need to give me my downer, give me the downer ending. So maybe I'm just reacting to the fact that there aren't a lot of stories like this, and therefore I sort of want to preserve that happy ending because they seem so rare.
All right,
the concept is great. The concept is so. I mean, I want to know how he thought of that. Where did he come up with the idea of eat a mushroom, write your mistake, go to sleep, everything's changed? I mean, the whole careful what you wish for because the unintended consequences. That's I understand that that's not a new concept, but the whole process of it is pretty amusing to me, and it's such a unique story. Her aspirations are so grounded. Everything about it is so grounded and very relatable and so real and so human, and adds this fantastical element to it. It's just it was so entertaining, and I enjoyed it, except for, like I said, the part that I already said.
Well, I find myself sort of on both sides of that. It was essentially like a fairy tale, a morality tale, really, at the end of the day. And I think as one of those, I think it does a really good job. I would say that there are consequences on like a personal level for her, like through all of those things that she had to go through. She sort of came to certain realizations about herself, about those around her, and I think ultimately it was sort of Bryan Lee O'Malley kind of talking about coming to terms with turning 30, and in the same way that I think Scott Pilgrim was, sort of coming to terms with like young adulthood. And even before that, I don't know if you've ever read his one before that, Lost at Sea, was very similar to that too. And I think like almost as like a reader, like you get a certain consequence out of it too. Like you sort of, even if you weren't necessarily struggling with those same issues that Bryan Lee may or may not have been dealing with, or at least the character was, like you sort of come to like certain understandings, which I think is cool, and it is also a difficult thing to construct a story that is essentially at its heart a fairy tale, without it being too moralistic, which I don't think it was, and keeping it entertaining and still fun and witty and clever and full of humor like it was. But I think the consequences were there. Like the consequence was her being able to then effectively deal with the problems that she wasn't effectively able to deal with in the first place. And I think there's something to be said for that. But then on the other hand, if you did sort of truncate it and cut off that little last ending bit, and leave it when she takes the bite out of the mushroom and it cuts the clouds, that would certainly make it for a different story. One that I think is sort of like equally as compelling in its own ways. It reminds me, there's this great interview that I was listening to relatively recently with the director, Terry Gilliam. I don't know if you guys are familiar. He was one of the Monty Python
guys,
guys, and he's done movies, 12 Monkeys, and Fear and Loathing Las Vegas.
Munchausen.
Yeah, so many. He's one of my favorite directors.
Brazil.
But it was an interview. It's on YouTube somewhere, and he was talking about the difference in between Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick, and that ultimately, like, storytelling comes down to two fundamental categories. It's like there are stories that answer questions for you, leave you wondering what that answer is, or essentially, I'm of course butchering what Terry Gilliam so eloquently said, but stories that make you sort of bring these questions and make you think about them. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And if you think about that in terms of Kubrick and a lot of his films, like a lot of it is that big, what the hell was that? What does this mean? And you have to figure it out for yourself. But then that framework doesn't necessarily work for fairy tales and for moralistic plays like Seconds and like a lot of Spielberg stuff, big sort of mass appeal kind of things. And I think also like this speaks like to the success of Seconds. And I think it's damn good if you did that either way. Like if you cut off the ending, it would have been awesome, and if you left the ending on, it's still really cool. You know what I mean? Like I think that's sort of like it speaks to the skill of the team working on it to construct a story like that. Now, I'm curious. What did you think about the issues that Kate was facing? Coming up against 30 and sort of dealing with things and her boyfriend in this kind of way. Like to me, what I saw a lot of it, there were multiple things going on. One was like her sort of like running away from sort of the consequences of her actions. And another was theme that was running through the book, I think, was like her and her boyfriend, and why the two of them sort of fell apart. And I'm wondering what you guys thought about that. Like, do you think that was handled well, or do you think that was just sort of kind of a caricature?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it started off with her, she had started this restaurant and she watched as all her friends kind of left over the years and she felt like older than all the new people and she couldn't really relate to them anymore. And so she, decided to go start this new restaurant. And I don't know, the thing that I noticed was that, yeah, she would try to run away from all of her problems instead of trying to, actually deal with them and solve them. Even as they got worse, instead of trying to work on them, it was just, okay, move on to getting past it. And so, I don't know, I related to it personally because, I think that's something that you have to learn to do as you grow older. So maybe that's something that he's, O'Malley's dealing with as well. Did you guys feel that way at all? Like,
any of you guys?
I think it was
I want to see what he writes 5 years from now because I hated the boyfriend. I thought he was a big, giant tool throughout the entire book. I totally get narratively why she ends up with him in the end. I think it's a fine ending. I just think that for me, when I'm reading this, when you think about the maturity, I sort of saw when she's with her friends, and then it says 5 years later, I saw that group of friends as being analogous to where the Scott Pilgrim series ended off, and 5 years later is sort of, the next stage in his life. And in the same token, I see the end of this maybe being another era, and then 5 years later, I really want to see her go back and be like, you know what, I'm just going to break up with this guy because I don't know. He never impressed me at all through the entire book as being a particularly interesting character, and maybe that's not interesting. He was interesting. He just wasn't a likable character. He seemed very, and she calls him out on it, and I think that works at the end, right? She calls him out on it. He calls himself out on it, but I still sort of. I kind of wanted, I'm like, okay, this is exactly where this book should have ended, but 5 years later. Kick that guy out of your house. That was my response to it.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I kind of I thought he was an interesting character, and I guess like I could kind of relate with like that kind of a person. Like on the surface, like he just seems like a total tool. Like he's like when they introduce him, not at first like when he's having dinner with his sister in seconds, but like later when they're talking about when eating.
Uh-oh.
Each other. Well, it seemed like it implied that in the story that's what was going on, and then that like through all of that sort of like facade, that like bullshit, like her and him managed to like create this like great connection between the two of them. And I guess like I knew this girl way back when who was in a similar way, so like. That spoke to me, I guess, like in a way, like I didn't sort of automatically dismiss him as this kind of a tool character. I don't think he was particularly well developed. I don't think you ever really got a sort of well-rounded sense of who he was, but I don't think like that was really the point.
That was one of my issues too. Mm-hmm. The cook that she had, the new chef that she had an affair with, was he was way more developed, and I think despite being a flawed character himself, he was still likable. And I thought I enjoyed his character more than her boyfriend. And it wasn't that her boyfriend was, I mean, I didn't find him that bad. He had reactions that, they seemed believable. When he gets mad that she calls it her restaurant, he takes it personally. And I can see, like, that's a couple argument, but other than that, it didn't really. It just told you that these two were good together. The book just kind of told you that they belong together and that they should be together, without really making me as a reader want to see them together. And that could be intentional, but and that's kind of that feeds into my whole "there's no consequence" thing, is that she gets everything she wants. And that just fell flat with me.
it sort of reminds me of the movies where you have a really strong female lead, and there's a love triangle. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Hunger Games. I don't know why. But, you have the main character, and there's two gentlemen who I've never read any of the books, and I've seen both movies, so I'm sure they're vastly different. But, there's always one that you latch on to because that character is fully formed, they're developed, they're flawed, much to the chef in Seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other character who is the guy the lead is going to eventually end up with it. You just know it in your bones.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they present those two different type of characters to really just strengthen the lead character's overall development.
Mm-hmm.
We know full well who they're going to end up with. But along the way, we want them to end up with the guy that they're not going to end up with.
That's a very good point, actually.
And they're there just to, and it's no small task. They're there to develop that protagonist. I'm trying to think of where the roles have been reversed, where there's been one guy and there's been two women, but usually the guy's just a dickhead who's cheating on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's never hasn't been done well in a while that I know of. But
it's actually usually the opposite. It's usually a guy, and then there's a nice girl that everybody wants the guy to choose.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
The homewrecker girl who the guy is fascinated with. It's like every '80s romantic comedy where the
right, and the guy's always just a big jerk, right?
She's been before me the whole time.
right. Okay. Here's another movie. God, was it Pretty in Pink?
Yep.
Everybody wanted to end up with Ducky.
Oh yeah. Dude, I forgot about
that other dude.
He's so nice, and he listens to you. He gets you.
He gets you. So that's what I'm talking about. And really, at the end of the day, those two supporting characters just helped her develop as a character, even though it was not the best movie. That's what they were there for.
It's really sad when you think about it. Those poor characters, man. Their whole fucking existence was just to support this other woman. Yeah, I thought the chef was way better developed, and I didn't necessarily find myself like rooting for him either, but like just in the way that he approached like who he was and his emotions and like his interactions with Katie, I think was just a lot better done than the boyfriend.
Well, they were legit. They were super legit. He'd get mad at her for acting the way she was, for being selfish. There's very real reactions. You can tell that it's happened to at least one of these creative team members, right? Whether it was
there are a couple scenes with him that I really, really enjoyed. It's like when, I think it's in one of the revisions where she says, like, instead of dissing his garnishes or something, she says, "Oh, I really like you and I really like these garnishes." And there's a panel where he just stops and stares at her, and then the next panel it's like him with like a bottle of whiskey and like some glasses, and it's like, "Anyone else thirsty?" That reaction was, I think, just spot on. The other one was when, after setting them up as sort of this love-hate thing, like they're arguing all the time and still sleeping together, and then when she gets him into bed and he just says, "I love you," and then that's the next revision, that she doesn't sleep with him in that night, so he never tells her that he actually loves her. But she still knows. She still remembers that. I thought that was an interesting point, and they never really addressed that too, because even later she still kept fooling around with him.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, after you.
I think that if this were a romantic comedy, the real story is actually not either of the dudes. The real story, like the character that you really want her to end up with at the end, is what's her name?
Hazel.
What's that?
Hazel?
Yeah, exactly. At the end of it, like,
she was sweet.
Hazel's great.
Like they seem to be the most compatible characters. So it seems like it's a love story. Even if it only ends up being a love story about finding a real good friend, it's still a far more successful love story than anything that's going on with either of those two guys. And that's really, for me, where all the best beats are. It's the development of our main character of Katie, and then her relationship with Hazel. That's where the meat of the story is, and the guys, they're just window dressing to get those characters. They're there to give Hazel and Katie an opportunity to talk about stuff and to relate to each other and to communicate. There's even a scene where she's like, "Do you even like guys?" And she's like, "I'm not sure yet." And I'm like, okay, these characters clearly are far more compatible than Katie is with either of the two diphead chefs.
I dug that scene so much. It was so well timed. It was so straightforward and innocent. Simple question: do you like guys? I don't know yet. I love that. There's it's so straightforward, and I don't know, that would have been something else if she would have ended up with Hazel.
Yeah, imagine if that's how the book ended.
5 years later, I'm telling you, the sequel, she leaves.
I'm telling you, that also would have been a very strong story. So we have three scenarios: how it really ended, or if it ended a couple of pages earlier when the house fairy bit the mushroom, or her ending up with Hazel. So, yeah, to Eric's point, I'd love to see 5 years down the road she ditches the dude and ends up with Hazel.
Yeah, there were two interpretations that I've heard about that scene. The one is the one that I thought of, which is why I really liked it, was that when she says, "Do you like boys? I don't know yet." And she says, "Oh, okay, cool," and immediately changes the subject. One was that she is like, it's like a really cool, just sort of nonchalant, and sort of like by default sort of acceptance of that, of the that she might be gay. She didn't know. The other was, which I thought was cool. Like that's how I immediately read it. But I was talking to a friend who actually didn't see that. She saw more as Katie not listening to her. And it's like the whole time she was like distracted with these clothes, and she asked her the question, but she's like, "Oh, okay. Oh, look at these shoes over here," because it's in the same like word balloon there that she says, "Okay, cool. Oh, look at these shoes here."
I think it's both. I think it's both. Both of them.
What do you think?
Actually, I mean, I agree with Eric. I think both. At first, I didn't think that. I didn't think that the dismissal was there. That wasn't my immediate sort of interpretation of the dialogue at all. So that's how I read it immediately. But it wasn't like really something that I put thought into. It was just sort of like a subconscious acceptance of like, oh, she was just immediately accepting it and moving on. But it does sort of make sense, like the whole time she's just not really listening to Hazel, kind of, or like is more concerned with like these problems that she wants to talk to Hazel about, and is like impressed with all these clothes that she has, all these shoes, and all this stuff that's going on. But I think Eric's right. When you get down to it,
we can't forget that Katie is a very selfish character. She's self-motivated throughout the entire story. So I think your friend has an excellent point. Maybe she was just thinking about herself and thinking about her lights and just using kind of fluffer conversation. I don't know. I said it's a remarkable scene.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And there is something to be said, too, and just in terms of the craft of constructing a scene like that where you can have multiple interpretations of it. Another thing I was a little confused about, and I wanted to see what you guys thought. So, like, in a couple different scenes in the book, when she's in the bath, she calls her dad, and it's like she tries to talk to him but can't, and ultimately says, "Oh, I just called to say I love you." But that happens a couple different times.
That felt like a very, real relationship that a character might have with their dad after experiencing a tragedy, only having your father and moving away. And families are so different. Everyone reacts in a different way to, especially a tragedy like that. They made it clear that her mom had passed away when she was younger, and that her and her dad kind of drifted apart from there.
Did they? I don't remember. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I think that was pretty early in the book between the first and second phone call to her dad, and
Mm.
she it just seemed like, because she talks about how, she calls him in winter and it's your birthday, and no, it's in August. Oh yeah, I guess I just calling to say hello. In those moments, I felt like those were in the beginning where she was the most alone and didn't really have Hazel at that point.
Mhm.
And she didn't have that trust in anyone, and she was lashing out because she didn't have anyone.
Mhm.
And that felt very real to me too. I mean, you do what's familiar when you're lonely, and when you bring out those lifelines, because you want some form of contact. And she's sitting in the bathtub, and I mean, I think the bathtub was kind of symbolic, because that's where you're the most isolated. Essentially, you're with yourself and your thoughts. There's no distractions except for, it's like almost meditative, and she was alone, literally, metaphorically, in every sense. And that's kind of, I mean, that just felt like a very real reaction to that loneliness, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting point.
I mean, I could be wrong, but
No, no, I mean,
I felt that way. When I went to college, I went to University of Utah, and my brother lived nearby. But I was I was born in that city, but I had lived there 20 years, and I was going there, and I lived in an apartment by myself, and it was a very isolated experience. And I came back home because of it. I remember, I can relate to that feeling of
mhm,
being alone and being faced with all that, and just wanting to talk to someone familiar.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
What do you
interesting.
guys think of that?
Well, it seemed very authentic to me whenever the scenes happened. I mean, it seemed very natural. It seemed very sympathetic, and it just, like through the entire moment, it did have a striking amount of just resonance. Like, this is what you do when you're sad. You reach out to the people that have known you the longest. And I agree with you, Joe. I think that in this particular in that particular device, I saw that as sort of a way of connecting more to the character, because it is easy to relate to something like that for a lot of us.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it was strong. It was a powerful set of moments there, and especially that, like, the theme went through, or that in each of those times that she called her dad, she couldn't tell him, she couldn't talk to him, and she kept trying to.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's where it's those scenes, and even though they're so small and very so short, that sort of speak the most about Katie,
Hmm.
especially when you get to the end, in the sense that she feels really alone, and that a lot of the decisions that she makes, and her sort of selfish perspective on things, like, is really sort of a result of, as someone who thinks she's alone, is only thinking about herself, really, and that sort of brings me to, like, the next point, which I was curious about what you guys thought of the second house spirit, the one that she brought in from Lucknow and poured the dirt into the mushrooms, because I thought that was sort of like the crux of the book right there at the end, where she's having that conversation with it, and it's just saying, "Oh, you all leave, all Katie's leave, all Katie's leave." Um, and then at the end, she realizes, "Oh, you're not a monster. You're a mirror." Um, that was, to me, that's sort of like the big part of the book right there. That was the crescendo. And what do you guys think? Anyone?
Katie, right?
Go ahead, Katie.
Mirror of herself. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was like a chance for her to have some self-reflection, but that's...
Do you think that was effective? Because I've heard mixed reviews about that scene.
I think it's incredibly effective, and I also I think it's more than just the reflection. I think it's the second house spirit sort of represents the effect that Katie is having on seconds. I mean, that's her destroying seconds. She is destroying seconds with sort of her inability to leave and her fear and her insecurity and all of her negativity. That is, even before the book, even before the plot starts, that's what she's doing. You know, they even they comment, they come right out and they say it. She's not cooking there anymore. But she's still sort of this negative presence. And I think as the book goes on, there's two things that are happening, right? There's the literal story of, well, I guess literal, but the fairy tale literal story of the two house spirits. And there's also her increasing insecurity and increasing sort of negativity and just sort of selfishness. And as the second house spirit grows more twisted and dark, I think that's the effect that she's having on those around her. So to me, when she has that dialogue, I think you're right, that is the most important part of the story, and I felt like it hit squarely on the bullseye.
What were you going to say, Ryan?
No, I was agreeing with Eric. She's essentially destroying everything around her. I mean, we are given second chances every single day. It's how we deal with them. Here, Katie runs away and eats a magic mushroom and says, "Well, I don't want to sleep with this guy," or "Well, I wish I didn't eat, that food and, have diarrhea the entire night," or whatever. It can be as simple as that, or as world altering some of her other decisions. But I think that is a nice manifestation of just all the hurt and all the chaos that she causes by running away from her problems. That's what that is.
She's sort of thoughtless, too, because every time, she writes in a little book to try to change something, it's something so minor that if she really, put some thought into what really needs to change, she could have fixed all her problems so, quickly, but she just spent so much time.
I think, Katie has a great point. It's all simple snapshots. It's all, well, I didn't like drinking that Coke. That's going to give me, extra calories. Let me eat a mushroom. When I could say, you know what, saw this accident and I could have done this. Anyways, let me eat the mushroom to fix that. I mean, it's again, but Katie is a very selfish character, and that plays throughout the entire book. And that witch at the end is just that manifestation of all her bad decisions and how they affect everything and everyone around her.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you still there, Ryan? You kind of froze. Oh yeah, there you go. Sorry, my computer just froze. Yeah. I feel the same way. I thought it was a really good scene. I had a couple friends who, when we were talking about it, thought it was a little too on the nose. But I disagree. I think it was really well done. It was that conversation that she has ultimately with the second house spirit from Lucknow is a conversation with herself. She's telling that creature everything that she needs to hear. And it's interesting. It's basically the same ending as Scott Pilgrim in a way. It's a little more serious than Scott Pilgrim is, but if you remember at the end, maybe because I just realized that some of you haven't actually read Scott Pilgrim, so sorry.
I think the book dances a very fine line between subtlety and bang it over your head, but I think that's the theme of the book. It's called Seconds, It's very, and even I think that the discussion of saying I'm going to call my new restaurant Katie's, that's kind of a way of kind of poking fun at this book, because this book, I was even as something as subtle as the bathroom and being in the bathtub and calling her dad to fighting her literal mirror. You know, it's just her darker image. It dances a fine line, and it does. I think it's. I can't fault it if it's, you know, it's on the nose. I think it's fair to say that, but I think that that's what this book essentially is. It is a fairy tale, and it is something that plays with the symbology, you know, and it plays with these quite literal interpretations of, you know, struggles. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think you're wholeheartedly right. I think the book really does dance between those lines of being really on the nose and really subtle, and that's it's impressive. I've said it a million times already, but it really is, and I think it was strong. I'm curious. I would love to have had this conversation with Bryan Lee O'Malley himself as well, to add him. To see exactly sort of what his thoughts were behind a lot of this. I had to add one more question, then we can wrap up. The skeletons? What did you guys think about those?
Visually, I think they're awesome. It's a very, it's got a very Dia de los Muertos kind of vibe. I think that the just the visual presentation and the wonderful one-liner, from the manager of the restaurant, like you're responsible for that. Like that little bit is it's one of the brightest points of just wonderful bit of dialogue and absurdity. So that's why I love that part. I think that's another one of those spots where it's like between the drops of hitting you over the head aggressively with symbols and being subtle. I think that's like hitting you over that aggressively with a symbol and then winking about it. I think that's one of my favorite ones, one of my favorite bits in the book.
Well, she even says, how is he playing a flute? He has no lips. You know, the flute hanging out of his mouth. I like that bit too.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any last thoughts that any of you have you want to add before we wrap this up?
Read the book. It's great.
Yeah, I thought it was a remarkable bit of craftsmanship at every level. All members of the creative team did their very best on this, and it shows. Everything is seamless and everything is beautiful, quite frankly.
Yeah. I'm actually excited to read it a second time, especially after you guys are so much better at seeing all the symbolism in this kind of stuff. So I tend to get like a better perspective on things after I hear this kind of discussion. So I'm excited to go through it like a second time and notice more of that nuance.
Yeah, we're a little behind. David's gone through it like 3 times now.
Yeah.
I
only picked up all this stuff that I picked up on was from the second reading that I did yesterday. So
Okay.
I generally, when I read a book, all this stuff goes way over my head until I sit down and reread it again. It takes me. For me, I'm a little slow like that. So.
Notice that he said he read it a second time, but he didn't deny that he read it more than 4 times. So just keep that in mind.
It's 2.5.
You know, in David's notebook, he probably wrote all the themes he thought were wicked cool and highlighted them.
All
put
down.
Stars next to him. I gotta mention this. Gotta mention it.
He has 2 copies, one that he writes in the margins.
Yeah.
One that he keeps on his bookshelf.
Yeah, I bought 2. I almost bought. There's like that deluxe edition that they had at Comic-Con. Did you guys see that?
No,
Yeah.
I didn't.
Had a slipcase, didn't it?
Yeah, but it was like $100 or something like that. I was like, I cannot justify spending $100 on this little book that I'm going to read in an hour and a half. Ryan, while we have you here, tell us a little bit about what you're working on. Let's give you a chance to push what you're doing.
Oh, word. Okay. Currently I'm writing a series with with Image Comics called Dark Engine. Art is by John Bivens, the remarkable John Bivens.
Oh, look, he's got it right there. Nice.
Oh, hey, look at that.
Second issue came out today, so you can find it in your local comic book store.
Have you picked up the second issue, Joseph?
Yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to get through it though,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Oh.
I have. We also have Kelly Fitzpatrick, who is the colorist now, and we have Christopher Crank, who is the letterist. Yeah, isn't that a remarkable cover that
Yeah,
they
it's
did?
awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
so cool.
So, this is really a story. It's a dark fantasy, and it's about you have your post-apocalyptic world, but instead of just kind of living in that world and accepting the horrors that live there, a group of madmen got together and created this ultimate savage. They put in a engine to power her, and it shot her back in time. And they're thinking, okay, well, she'll be a spear thrown across time to kill the great enemy that made the world so, right? But what they don't realize is that this engine is sentient, that it is basically the seed of their destruction.
Mm.
And people either really love it or people don't love it. It's written and it's created for a very specific type of reader.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun because John and I are playing with different genres and different visuals, and we really are trying to push things. So, like in the second issue, she goes from ancient Egypt, where she's worshipped as the eater of souls, and at the end of issue 2, at the end of that same issue, she explodes out of a horse during the time of Beowulf, so in Geatland. And throughout that, we get a bit of exposition peppered throughout the series, or peppered throughout the issue. And we'll be doing that for this first arc. And the second arc will be much more straightforward. And we've already got some really fantastic, really fun things lined up. So yeah, Dark Engine, pick it up. Lovely artwork, lovely coloring. It's a fun project.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you see it going?
Really, that's up to the readers, quite frankly. I know John and I have a set number in mind, right? We don't want to be doing this for 6 or 7 years or anything crazy like that. I think our main idea is to go about 3 years and see how many issues we can produce in 3 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, depending on reception, depending on readership, it may go longer or it may go shorter. But during that time, we're going to do some pretty fucking insane things and see just exactly what we can get away with.
Yeah, the concept allows for a lot of cool ideas, so I'm excited about that. It seems like the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, Joe, since you have a copy of issue 2, can you show the viewers that double-page spread of her? Katie, check this out. You'll dig this.
Okay.
It's where she's worshipped as that eater of the dead. John did it.
Yeah, dude, John's killing it. This is his first book?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's right.
His first book.
Oh,
Right here.
I still can't believe that. He's like...
Yoink. There we go.
Yeah. We'll see. Maybe let's
There you go. That's
put that up on the site too when this actually goes up on Bleeding Cool.
So,
yeah, it's some beautiful looking stuff.
Damn.
It's so well done, man. Dude, John is crazy good.
Yeah, so I don't know. Some people have said some really, really lovely things about it, and it's at the end of the day, it's just a swords and sorcery monster book with time traveling and a woman who has a sword made from a dinosaur's rib that we've called the ribs.
Now, how much of this comes from you guys just talking, and how much of it comes from you John's just drawing this stuff down and sending it to you, and you're like, oh my god.
No. So this is the first time John and I have worked together, but we've known each other for about 5 years. And John, everybody should know that John is a bit insane, right? So I'll send him ideas, and I'll say, okay, how about it looking like this? And the dude he'll just maybe send me a sketch or an outline, and then 2 days later I get the full page. Here you go, this is what his character looks like. I'm like, yeah, okay, that works. Sure. And the real trick though is figuring out just how much dialogue and exposition goes into a certain page or an issue versus how much we take out. So issue 1 had very, very little dialogue, but if you notice, most issue 1s have a lot of dialogue, and to my consternation, a lot of first issues hold your hands. I mean, I think that comic book readers are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet. I mean, some of the things that the 4 of you were bringing up about seconds, I didn't even think about. And that is the goal with this book, is to have people fill in the blanks, for people to be unsure, to take something new away with each reading. And John's artwork and Kelly's coloring, it affords to do that. So I'm very fortunate to work with those two.
Yeah, it's a great book, man. I'm really digging it. I really, really am.
Thanks.
And I hope at least some other people like it too. I know at our shop we stole a good chunk. I sent you that photo, I think, a little while ago of those issues. I think we've only got a couple left of #1, and Leaf is the name of the guy who owns the store. He ordered pretty deep on the second one too. So
Nice.
Good reception over here at least. So.
Yeah, somebody the other day called it poetic, which is, I never thought of myself as being poetic, but yeah, I'll take it. Sure.
Are there any other projects coming up from you? You can talk about at least.
You know, it's just whisperings. It's just a few little things here and there. Nothing to preemptively talk about, but I don't know. I love comics. I love having these discussions, and it's such a beautiful, such a pure art form, and I don't know. I think the cat will agree that it's
He needs to be pet.
yeah. Katie, is that your cat?
It was earlier, but I don't think it's this time.
That's my cat this time.
He's out at my door for like 20 minutes, though.
I think they're having their own Google Hangout. The internet.
Katie, I think you have the best background out of everyone.
We were
Oh,
talking about that.
Yeah. It's really awesome.
I'm not much of a professional, but I'm trying.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right, well, everyone, it's been an absolute pleasure. Ryan, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule with your family and work and comics and everything to come and talk to us. Same with you, and same with you, Katie. I'm glad that you can come and join us. It's a pleasure to have you. I'd love to have both of you back, maybe later on down the line. It would be a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you add Ryan's book to my pull list, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll get it. All right, so that's it. That's our first official non-practice episode of The Bleed. I hope you folks enjoyed it. It will be a podcast as well as this little video that we have here. It'll be up on Bleeding Cool probably tomorrow. And, yeah, we'll see you next time. It's been unreal.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.